The control yoke was dead weight in Second Lieutenant Lee Lamar's hands. A few seconds ago, he was co-piloting a B-24 Liberator named Bottoms Up at 24,000 feet. Now the world was tilting on its axis. The sky, usually a steady blue dome, was rushing upward to meet him. An anti-aircraft shell, an 88mm slug of superheated German steel, had just slammed into the aircraft. It didn't just damage the plane, it knocked it out of the sky. The heavy bomber, loaded with explosives, fuel, and adrenaline, rolled onto its back and went into a dive. It dropped like a stone, 3 miles. They fell 3 vertical miles in just seconds. The G-forces pinned Lamar to his seat. The altimeter unwound so fast it was just a blur of white numbers. Beside him, his pilot, Randall Darden, was fighting the same losing battle, wrestling with hydraulic systems that were rapidly bleeding out. At 5,000 feet, just moments before they would have smashed into the gray waters of the Adriatic Sea, the wings bit into thicker air. The nose pulled up. The rivets groaned, but they leveled off. They were alive, but they were low, they were slow, and they were heavy. Lamar looked back. 2 engines were dead. The plane was shuddering, struggling to stay airborne. They needed to lose weight, and they needed to lose it now. "Throw everything out," Darden yelled. In the back, the crew started ripping heavy Browning 50 caliber machine guns off of their mounts. These were their only defense against fighters. It didn't matter. If they didn't dump them, gravity would kill them before the Germans ever could. They dragged the guns to the waist windows and shoved them out into the slipstream, then the ammo belts, then the flak jackets. They were stripping the plane to its skeleton, trying to buy just a few more miles of flight. They were trying to reach the island of Vis, a tiny British-held strip in a sea of Nazi occupation. It was their only hope. They didn't know it yet, but they weren't going to make it. Welcome to World War II Obscura. This is the story of Lee Lamar, a farm boy from Missouri and a B-24 Liberator named Bottoms Up. It's a story about the lies we tell ourselves in war, that because the end is in sight, we're safe, that because a mission is routine, we'll come back. By November 1944, the Allies were closing the ring around Nazi Germany. The outcome of the war wasn't really in doubt anymore, but the dying wasn't over. The story of Bottoms Up is one of thousands of small tragedies of the war. It didn't change the map of Europe. It didn't shorten the conflict, but for the 10 men inside that bomber and the families waiting for them to come back home, it was the entire world. What makes this story truly unique isn't just the crash. It's what happened 60 years later. It's about how a piece of aluminum buried in the soil of Croatia reached out across the decades to answer a question old men never stopped asking: what really happened to us? The tragedy began with a promise. It was before dawn on November 18, 1944. Lee Lamar and his crew sat in a briefing hut at their base in southern Italy. They were tired. This was their 21st mission. They knew the drill, the air smell of cigarettes and nervous sweat. The intelligence officer stood up and pulled back a curtain on the map. He pointed to the target in northern Italy. He smiled. He told them this is going to be a milk run. And the slang of the Air Corps, a milk run is an easy mission. Light flak, no fighters, home by lunch. It was exactly what these exhausted men wanted to hear. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The Allies owned the sky. Lamar climbed into the right-hand seat of Bottoms Up, feeling relatively at ease. They took off, forming up with a 461st Bombardment Group turning north toward the Alps. But the intelligence officer was wrong. The Germans hadn't given up. They had concentrated their remaining anti-aircraft batteries around key transport hubs, and they were waiting. Back in the air over the Adriatic Sea, the plane is limping at 5,000 feet. They've jettisoned their guns. They're defenseless, flying over the Adriatic, desperate to reach the emergency landing strip on the island of Vis, but they're losing altitude. Lamar scans the instruments. They're burning fuel too fast. The 2 remaining engines are overheating, straining to keep up the 30-ton aircraft in the sky. Vis is too far. Pilot Randall Darden makes the call. They have to turn toward the mainland. They have to fly over the Istrian Peninsula, territory occupied by the Germans, and try to crash land or bail out overland. It's a terrible choice. Ditching in the cold Adriatic meant freezing to death in minutes. Turning inland meant flying a broken, slow, unarmed bomber directly over enemy flak batteries. They turned toward land. Specifically, they turned toward Pula in what is now Croatia. It was a fatal mistake. Pula was a fortress. As Bottoms Up lumbered over the coastline, the German gunners on the ground couldn't believe their luck. Here was an American bomber, flying low, slow, and straight. They opened fire. Lamar heard the thump-thump-thump of flak exploding around them. The plane shook violently, then a direct hit. Their number 3 engine exploded. Fire engulfed the wing. The plane didn't just drop this time, it disintegrated. The intercom went dead, the cockpit filled with smoke. Lamar looked at Darden. The pilot was wrestling the yoke, but the plane wasn't responding. It began to spin. "Get out," Darden shouted, though the alarm bell was likely already ringing at everyone's head. Lamar tried to get out of his seat. Centrifugal force was pinning him down. The plane was spiraling, spinning like a falling leaf. He was trapped in a metal box that was turning into a coffin. He managed to unbuckle. He clawed his way toward the bomb bay. The catwalk, a narrow strip of metal running through the center of the fuselage, was slick with hydraulic fluid. He looked back. Darden was still in his seat. He was holding the plane steady, fighting the spin, buying his crew time. Lamar dove into the bomb bay. The doors were open. The ground was rushing up. Green fields, red roofs, and flashes of gunfire. He pushed himself out into the void. For a second, there was silence. The roar of the engines was replaced by the rush of wind. Lamar pulled the ripcord. His chute blossomed. The jerk rattled his teeth. He swung there, suspended in the cold November air. He looked down. He saw the wreckage of bottoms up, clipping trees, then burning in a field. He saw other parachutes drifting down. Then he saw soldiers. They were running across the fields toward him. German soldiers, the Wehrmacht. Lamar hit the ground hard. He scrambled to his feet, tangling in his shroud lines. He didn't have a weapon. He barely had his wits. He frantically hid his parachute in the roots of a tree next to a stone wall. Still, he was captured almost immediately. For Lee Lamar, his flying war was over. The war of survival had just begun. Lamar was sent to Stalag Luft 1, a prisoner of war camp on the Baltic Sea. The winter of 1944-45 was the coldest in Europe in a century. Lamar was starving. The Germans had almost no food for themselves, let alone their prisoners. He slept on a wooden slat with one thin blanket. The wind from the Baltic screamed through the cracks in the barracks. He spent months shivering, hallucinating about food, and wondering who else made it out of bottoms up. He didn't know that his pilot, Randall Darden, hadn't made it. Darden stayed at the controls until it was too late. He died so his crew could jump free. Lamar survived the camp. In May 1945, the Russians liberated him. He went home to Missouri and did all the things he dreamt about. He ate everything. He slept under piles of warm blankets. He went to college on the GI Bill. He became a civil engineer. He got married. He had kids. He became a normal American man of the mid-20th century. But he never talked about November 1944. It wasn't just trauma. It was government policy. During the repatriation process, the military discouraged former POWs from dwelling on their experiences. They were told to forget it, to move on. The war was won. Why drag up bad memories? So Lee Lamar buried bottoms up. He buried the fear, the cold, and its guilt. For 60 years, the plane remained a pile of aluminum scraps in a Croatian field and a dark shadow in the back of Lee Lamar's mind. History has a way of refusing to stay buried. Luka Bekic is a Croatian archaeologist. In 2006, he oversaw the excavation of an ancient Roman villa. They dug through layers of soil and stone, and then metal. Lots of metal. Not Roman, not medieval. Aluminum and steel. Airplane metal. Over 3,000 fragments, including parts of a Browning machine gun, oxygen system pieces, and structural panels, all from a B-24 Liberator. The team was stunned. Why here? Why at a Roman site? Bekic wasn't satisfied with identifying the metal. More than just an archaeologist, he was also a veteran of the 1990s Balkan Wars. He had seen war in his own backyard, so he was interested in the scars conflicts leave on the land. They collected serial numbers, and with a bit of digital detective work, they began searching online for veterans who may have flown in the area. They traced it all down. It belonged to a B-24J Liberator named Bottoms Up. He wanted to know the men. He started digging through archives, searching internet databases. He found an old interview with Lee Lamar. The message began quietly. "Dear Mr. Lamar, I believe we found your bomber." Imagine receiving that email. You're 83 years old, sitting at your home in Missouri, and suddenly a stranger from a country that didn't even exist under that name when you were there writes to tell you, "I found your plane." Lamar hesitated. He hadn't opened that door in decades, but Bekic was persistent. He didn't want to just confirm facts. He wanted to offer closure. He invited Lamar to come back. In 2007, nearly a year after the first contact, Lee Lamar boarded a plane. He flew back to Europe. He traveled to Croatia. But this wasn't just vacation. It was a pilgrimage. Luka Bekic took him to the field. It's a powerful thing to stand on a physical spot where you almost died. The landscape hadn't changed much. The dirt was the same. The wind coming off the Adriatic was the same. But the people were different. Bekic introduced Lamar to the locals, and this is where the story takes its final beautiful twist. He met the now old men who were teenagers in 1944. They remembered the crash. They remembered the burning plane falling from the sky like a comet. They told him the parachutes looked like white flowers floating to the ground. Some of Lamar's crew had evaded capture. They hadn't been caught by the Germans. They were found by Croatian partisans, local resistance fighters. Lamar met the people who helped save his crewmates. He heard stories he never knew. He learned that while he was freezing in a German stalag, the people of this village had risked their lives to hide his friends. They fed him when they had no food for themselves and guided them to the mountains to safety. He learned the fate of everyone on board. He finally understood the entire picture of that chaotic day. Standing in that field, holding a piece of jagged aluminum, a piece of his own airplane, Lee Lamar finally came home. The story of Bottoms Up isn't just about a crash. It's about the long tale of war. We tend to think of battles as discrete events. They start, they end. The winner is declared and the history book closes. But for the people inside the machine, the event never really ends. It echoes. It sits in their subconscious for decades, waiting for a trigger. Lee Lamar's story reminds us that history is personal. It's not about the movement of armies on a map. It's about a 20-year-old kid throwing a machine gun out of a window, praying the plane will stay up for 5 more minutes. It's about a pilot staying at the wheel to save his crew. It's about an archaeologist generations later realizing that a piece of scrap metal is a sacred object that deserves to be reconnected with its owner. Lee Lamar imposed order on his wartime chaos by building a normal life, by becoming an engineer and raising a family. Meaning didn't come from forgetting, it came from remembering, it came from going back. This story matters because it proves that the past is never done with us, and if we're brave enough to face it, we might find not just wreckage, but connection. If you want to see more forgotten stories, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment with a person or mission you think we should cover. Thank you for watching, and remember, history is larger than we could ever imagine.